The call lasted 11 minutes. I know this because HR logs all incoming calls to the employee relations line, and the log showed 11 minutes and 43 seconds from the moment the line connected to the moment the caller disconnected. The caller had introduced herself as a concerned member of the community who had become aware of some troubling behavior by one of the company's senior employees. She had not given her name. She had given mine. She said I had been systematically stealing from my employer for approximately 2 years. She said she had documentation. She said she felt it was her civic duty to report this, and she hoped the company would take appropriate action. She then disconnected. What she did not know, what she had clearly not considered at any point in the 11 minutes and 43 seconds, was that the call had been recorded, that the number had been logged, that the HR coordinator who took the call was required by policy to flag any anonymous misconduct allegation for review, which meant my director was notified, which meant my director was required to document the allegation and share it with me. What she also did not know was that I had been promoted to Senior Director of Operations 4 weeks earlier, after 6 years of building something from almost nothing, and that my company did not fire people based on anonymous phone calls, and that the HR coordinator who took her call had, in her own words to my director afterward, found the tone of the call unusual, unusually specific, unusually certain, unusually personal for someone claiming to be a concerned member of the community. My name is Rachel. I am 38 years old. My husband David is 40. His mother Linda is 63. We have been married for 4 years. This is the story of what Linda did when she found out I earned more than her son, and what I did about it. But I want to start with David, because David is not the villain of this story, and I want to be clear about that before I tell you who is. David is an architect. He designs residential homes, and he is good at it in the patient, methodical way of someone who understands that a house has to work for the people who live in it, not just look correct from the street. He earns a good living. I earn more than he does. This has never been a problem between us. We talked about it before we married. Plainly and without drama. The way you discuss a fact that is just a fact. I earn more. He earns well. Together we earn enough for the life we want, and neither of us has ever found anything complicated about that. Linda found it complicated from the beginning. She said things in the particular sideways way that certain people say things that are too direct to say directly. She said things like, "It must be nice for David to have such a successful wife," with the particular intonation that turns it successful into a word with edges. She said things like, "I always thought David would be the provider," with the pause afterward that invited you to disagree and prove her wrong. She said things like, "In my day women," and then did not finish the sentence because she did not need to. These were the smaller versions. I managed them. David addressed them when they happened in his presence, and she received his addressing with the practiced hurt of someone who has learned that performed hurt is more effective than argument. I noted all of it and moved on because individually each instance was manageable, and the sum of them had not yet reached the level that required a different kind of response. Then I got the promotion. Senior Director of Operations. A title I had been working toward for 3 years. A salary increase that put me significantly above David's income. Not that David and I had announced the number, but Linda had asked David what my new title meant for my salary, in what she described as just curiosity, and David, who is congenitally unable to be evasive about direct questions, had told her an approximate figure. She went quiet. David told me this later. He said she had gone very quiet when he said the number and changed the subject. That had been a Friday. The call to HR happened the following Tuesday. 4 days. She had sat with the information for 4 days, and then she had picked up the phone. My director called me into her office on the Wednesday. Her name is Diane, and she is one of those people who delivers bad news with the specific kindness of someone who knows that the packaging matters as much as the content. She said she needed to share something with me, and that she wanted me to hear it from her directly, and that before she said anything she wanted me to know that she and the company's legal team had already reviewed the allegation and found it without basis. She said there had been an anonymous call to HR the previous day. She told me what the caller had said. I sat in Diane's office and I listened, and I felt something very cold and very specific settle over me. Not rage. Clarity. The complete and immediate clarity of someone who already knows exactly who made that call and what they were trying to do, and what is going to happen next. I said, "Do you have the call recording?" Diane said yes. I said, "Do you have the number it came from?" She said yes. I said, "I know who made that call." She looked at me carefully. I said, "My mother-in-law found out about my promotion 4 days ago." Diane was quiet for a moment. She said, "Rachel, I want to be clear with you. We do not take action on anonymous, unsubstantiated allegations. What she described does not match anything in your personnel record, your expense history, or any audit we have ever conducted. This call did not and will not affect your standing with this company." I said, "I understand." I said, "I appreciate that." I said, "I need to ask you something. I need to know if I can have a copy of the call recording and the phone log for my own purposes." Diane said she would need to check with legal. She checked. Legal said the recording was company property and could not be shared directly, but that if a civil matter arose from the call that required the recording as evidence, it could be subpoenaed. Diane told me this. I thanked her. I left her office. I went to my own office. I closed the door. I sat at my desk for approximately 90 seconds. Then I called our lawyer. His name is Mr. Torres, and he had handled our house purchase and our wills. He had never handled a defamation matter. He said, "This is outside my primary work, but I know exactly who you need, and I am calling her right now." He called. The lawyer he referred me to was Ms. Kim. I had an appointment at 8 the following morning. I did not tell David any of this until that evening. I told him after dinner, while we were still at the table, because I did not want to tell him in a transitional moment. I wanted him sitting still. I told him what had happened. I told him about the call. I told him about the recording. I told him about the 4 days between his phone call with his mother and the HR call. He was very still while I told him. Then he said, "I am going to call her." I said, "David." He looked at me. I said, "Not yet." He said, "Rachel." I said, "I need you to trust me for 48 hours. He said, "I trust you completely." I said, "Then let me and Miss Kim set the terms of what happens next before anyone contacts Linda." He said, "Okay." He said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I am better than okay." He said, "What does that mean?" I said, "It means I know exactly what I am doing, and I need 48 hours to do it properly." He nodded. He did the dishes. I went to prepare for the morning. Ms. Kim was 45, concise, and the kind of person who made you feel that whatever problem you had brought her was the exact problem she had been waiting all morning to solve. She listened to everything I told her without interrupting. She asked 4 questions. She said, "Is there any factual basis for the theft allegation?" I said no. She said, "Does the company have a record of the allegation?" I said yes, in writing. She said, "Can you establish that the caller was your mother-in-law?" I said I had the phone number and she had called from a landline registered to her address. Miss Kim made a note. She said, "What outcome do you want?" I said I want her to understand that there are consequences. I want the consequences to be real. I do not want to destroy her, but I want it to hurt enough that she never considers doing anything like this again to me or to anyone else. Ms. Kim looked at me for a moment. She said, "You have just described a well-calibrated defamation claim." She said, "Here is what we have. We have a false statement of fact made to a third party, specifically an employer. We have the statement made without privilege, meaning there was no legal protection for the communication. We have actual damages in the form of harm to professional reputation and the documented stress of an HR investigation, even a brief one. And we have, when we subpoena it, the recording of the call itself. She said Linda had called from her own home telephone. She had not used a payphone. She had not used a friend's phone. She had sat in her own kitchen and dialed my employer from her landline and spent 11 minutes making false theft allegations against her daughter-in-law, who had just been promoted to senior director. Ms. Kim said this with the quiet satisfaction of someone reading a document that says exactly what they needed it to say. She said we send a letter. Formal demand for settlement. We attach the phone log showing the call origin. We give her 14 days to respond through counsel. Then we see what she does. The letter went out on a Friday. Linda called David on the Saturday morning in tears. She said she had received a legal letter, and she did not understand it, and she was frightened. David told her he had been informed of the situation, and that she should retain a lawyer and respond through counsel. She said, David, I am your mother. He said, Mom, you called Rachel's employer and told them she was a thief. She said, I was concerned. He said, about what? She said, about Rachel's influence over you. About what she is doing to our family. He said, what is she doing to our family? Linda said she earns more than you. She said that was not natural. She said a man should provide. He said, Mom, I am going to stop this call now, and I need you to understand something. Rachel and I have a marriage. Not the marriage you would have designed for us. Ours. She earns more than I do. I am proud of her. I am proud of us. What you did is not concern. What you did is defamation, and there are legal consequences for it. She cried. He said, I know this is hard. He said, get a lawyer. He said, we will talk more when there is legal process in place. He hung up. He came and found me in the kitchen. He said, she said you earn more than me, and that is not natural. I said, I know. He said, I am so sorry she is this person. I said, it is not your fault who she is. He said, it partially is. I said, no. What she did is hers. He said, I meant I should have addressed the smaller things sooner, and not let the pattern build to this. I said, that is fair. He said, I am going to do better. I said, I know. He said, is there coffee? I said, yes. We sat in our kitchen and drank coffee, and outside it was Saturday, and the street had the particular quiet of a morning when nothing official is required of anyone. I thought about Linda sitting in her kitchen with the legal letter. I thought about 11 minutes and 43 seconds. I thought about what she had been trying to take from me, and what it would have cost her nothing to simply let me have. I finished my coffee. I went back to work. Linda retained a lawyer. He was a general practice attorney named Mr. Watts, who called Miss Kim the following week and opened by saying his client maintained that the call had been made out of genuine concern and that there had been no intent to cause harm. Ms. Kim said intent is not the legal standard for defamation. She said the statement was false. It was made to a third party, and it caused demonstrable professional harm. She said she was prepared to present the call recording and the HR documentation in support of a civil claim. Mr. Watts said his client was an older woman who had acted out of misguided but genuine concern for her son. Ms. Kim said her client was a senior director of operations who had spent 11 minutes being described as a thief to her employer's HR department by someone who knew the allegation was false. She said she would like to resolve this without a trial, but that her client's position on settlement was firm. The settlement demand was $85,000. Ms. Kim had calculated it based on the documented HR time spent on the investigation, a valuation of reputational harm, and what she described as a deterrence component. She told me plainly that the deterrence component was the part that made the number real. She said, we are not just compensating for what happened. We are making it expensive enough that it does not happen to you or to anyone else. Mr. Watts came back twice with lower numbers. Ms. Kim declined twice. She did not negotiate on the deterrence component. She said that is not the flexible part. He came back a third time at $78,000. She said no. The fourth response was $85,000 with no admission of liability. Ms. Kim brought it to me. I said yes. The settlement was signed 6 weeks after the letter was sent. $85,000. No admission of liability, which was standard. Linda had to have the money wired from her savings, which she had been accumulating for 30 years, which she had been planning to use for retirement supplementation. Mr. Watts had told David this privately, not in violation of anything, just as a context note. David told me. I sat with that for a day. Not guilt. Something more considered. An acknowledgement that real consequences land on real people, and that this had been the point, and that the point had been made, and that was both right and costly. The settlement funds went into an account I opened separately. I had decided before the settlement was signed what I was going to do with them. My mother had worked as a home care aide for 21 years. She had never earned more than $38,000 in a single year. She had never taken a vacation outside of our home state. She had never stopped working because she could not afford to stop working. I transferred $85,000 into her account and called her to tell her. She thought there had been a mistake. I said, no mistake. She said, where did this come from? I said, from someone who tried to punish me for earning it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Rachel. I said, yes. She said, I raised you right. I said, you did. I said, go somewhere you have always wanted to go. She said, that is a lot of somewheres. I said, pick the first one. She went to Italy the following spring. She sent me a photograph from a cafe in Florence. She was sitting at a small table in the sun, with an espresso, and her coat over the back of her chair, and an expression I have never seen on her face before. Not just happiness. Ease. The particular ease of someone who has set down a weight they have been carrying for so long they forgot it was heavy. I have that photograph on my phone. I look at it sometimes when I am having the kind of day that requires perspective. It provides it immediately. Here is the part of this story I want to linger on because I think it is the most important part. The recording. Not the settlement. Not the number. Not the photograph from Florence. The recording. When the case concluded and the settlement was signed, the recording was no longer needed as evidence. But Miss Kim had obtained it through the legal process and shared it with me as part of the case file. I listened to it once. Just once. Linda's voice on the line. Not disguised. Not altered. Her own voice that I had heard at Sunday dinners and birthday gatherings and Christmas tables for 4 years. Her own voice saying the words. She described what I had allegedly been doing. She described amounts that were completely fabricated. She described methods that bore no relation to anything in the actual operations of my company. She was specific in the way that people who are lying are specific because they believe specificity sounds credible. She said she had become aware of this through, and she paused here, a reliable source. The HR coordinator would later say in her statement to our lawyer that this pause had been what first struck her as unusual. A concerned member of the public does not pause before their source. A person who is making up a source pauses. I listened to 11 minutes and 43 seconds, and I heard my mother-in-law describe me as a thief to my employer in a voice so steady and certain that if I had not known the content was false, I would have found it convincing. That is the part that stays with me. Not that she did it. That she did it with such complete certainty. As if saying it made it true. As if she had the authority to define me, and the phone call was just the mechanism for making the definition official. She did not have that authority. Nobody has that authority over you but you. What you have built is yours. What you have earned is yours. What someone says about it into a recorded phone line is just sound. I am still Rachel. Still Senior Director of Operations. Now VP of Operations after this year's performance review. Still married to David, who did the dishes on the night I told him, and has never once suggested that my earning more than him is anything other than what it is, which is the fact of our life and the result of our choices and nobody's business but ours. Still the daughter of a woman who is sitting in a photograph from Florence with an espresso and ease on her face and 30 years of weight finally off her shoulders. The call lasted 11 minutes. What Linda did not know was that every single minute was recorded, that the number was logged, that the HR coordinator flagged the tone, that my director told me immediately, that I had a lawyer in 48 hours, that I had a plan in 72, that the plan did not include rage or confrontation or the kind of hot public reckoning that would have felt satisfying for 15 minutes and cost me everything I had built. It included Ms. Kim and her deterrence component, and a very specific wire transfer, and a photograph from a cafe in Florence in the spring. She called to take something from me. What she did not know was that she handed me the mechanism for giving my mother something she had never had. I think about that sometimes when I am having the kind of day that requires perspective. It provides it immediately. It always does. Here is my question for you. If your mother-in-law called your employer and told them you were stealing, would you have gone straight to a civil lawsuit, or tried to handle it within the family first? Ntaytaesh or nah? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. There is one more thing I want to tell you. About Linda now. 2 years after the settlement. Because this story does not end with the wire transfer, and the photograph and the deterrence component, though those are all real and all matter. It ends differently, and I think you should know how. David continued to see his mother after the settlement. Not frequently, not warmly in the old way, but he saw her. He is her son, and he had decided that whatever she had done, severing the relationship entirely was not what he wanted to do with it. He made that decision himself without me asking him to, or pressing him either direction. I respected it because it was his. I did not go with him to see her for 8 months. In the 9th month he said she had been asking if she could write to me. Not call, write. He said he thought she was genuinely trying to figure out how to say something that she had no practice saying. I said I would read a letter if she wrote one. She wrote it in longhand. 4 pages. It arrived by post in a cream envelope with her handwriting on the front. I opened it at the kitchen table on a Saturday morning with my coffee. I will not tell you everything she said because some of it was private, and some of it was hers, and not mine to share. I will tell you what she said at the end. She said she had spent 63 years believing certain things about how families were supposed to work and about what men were supposed to provide and about what it meant, when the order of things was different from what she expected. She said she had been wrong. She said she had not known how to be wrong out loud until she had to sit with what she had done for 2 years and understand what it had cost her and what she had been trying to take and why. She said what Rachel has built is admirable, and I was afraid of it, and I let my fear become cruelty, and cruelty become a phone call, and I will carry that for the rest of my life. She said she did not expect forgiveness. She said she was writing because she wanted me to know that she knew. I read it twice. I put it in the drawer. I sat with it for a week. Then I called David and said I would come the next Sunday. I went. I sat in Linda's kitchen and she made tea, and did not say everything in the letter out loud again, because she had already said it and we both knew it, and that was sufficient. She asked about my work. I told her about it. She said she did not fully understand what a VP of operations did, but that it sounded significant. I said it is. She said I know. She said I think I always knew. The tea was ordinary and the conversation was careful, and when I left I said goodbye to her by her first name as I had always done, and she said goodbye to me by mine. David walked me to the car. He said thank you. I said I know. I said it is not finished. He said I know. I said it is different now. He said yes, it is. The photograph from Florence is still on my phone. My mother went back to Italy last autumn. She went to Rome this time. She sent me a photograph from the Pantheon. She was standing in the light that comes through the oculus in the roof, and she was looking up at it. and her expression was the same as the one in Florence. Ease. Weight put down. A woman who has arrived somewhere she was always supposed to reach. I look at that photograph on the days that require perspective. They all provide it. Every single one. I want to tell you what David said to me the night after we first went back to Linda's. We were home. It was late. The kind of late where the house is quiet, and the day has processed itself into something you can examine without too much heat still in it. He said, I need to tell you something I have never said properly. I said, okay. He said, I have known for most of our relationship that my mother had a specific kind of problem with you. Not dislike. Something more about what you represent. What your success represents. About the order of things she expected. I knew it and I managed it in the way I managed most things with her, which was to address the instances when they surfaced, and not address the pattern underneath them. He said that was a failure. I said I know. He said I failed you. I said I know that too. He said I am telling you because I want to be said out loud between us, and not just understood. I said I hear you. He said, do you forgive me for it? I said, David. He said, I need to know. I said, yes. I said, the failure is part of what happened, and what happened is behind us. He said, is it really? I said, yes. But not because it did not happen. Because we handled it. He said, you handled it. I said, we. He said, you did the hard part. I said, you did the dishes. He almost smiled. I said, you called her and said what needed saying. You did not leave me to fight for the marriage alone when she attacked it. You stood. He said I should have stood sooner. I said yes. But you stood when it mattered. He said I am going to keep standing. I said I know. I know you will. We sat in the quiet of our own house with the particular late-night stillness that belongs to a home where the two people inside it understand each other clearly, and we were okay. We were more than okay. We were the exact thing Linda had called from her landline to disrupt. A marriage between two people who have decided each other, and who will not be decided by anyone else. She had 11 minutes and 43 seconds. We have the rest of our lives. There is no contest. Let me give you the full timeline because timelines matter in situations like this. They show you the shape of something that, in the living of it, felt formless and overwhelming. Monday, David tells his mother the promotion number. Friday of that week, we come home from dinner, and David mentions she seemed quiet on the phone when he called to check in. I note this and say nothing. Tuesday of the following week, the call to HR. Tuesday evening, Diane calls me into her office. Wednesday morning, I meet with Ms. Kim. The following Saturday, the legal letter is sent. The Saturday after that, Linda calls David in tears. 2 weeks after that, Mr. Watts makes first contact. 6 weeks after the legal letter, settlement signed. $85,000 wired. Wire confirmed. 8 months after settlement, David mentions Linda wants to write. 9 months after settlement, the letter arrives. 1 year after settlement, I go back to Linda's kitchen. A Saturday in autumn with ordinary tea and careful conversation. 2 years after settlement, I become VP of Operations. Linda says it sounds significant. It is. The timeline of how something that tried to break you instead clarified you. Each step was just the next step. None of them felt inevitable at the time. All of them were. You take the call. You get the lawyer. You build the case. You sign the document. You wire the money. You call your mother. You wait. You read the letter. You go back to the kitchen. You drink the tea. You drive home. You sit in the quiet with your husband, and you say the things out loud that need to be said out loud. And then you get up in the morning and you go to work, senior director, then VP, and you are still yourself, still earned, still Rachel. And the 11 minutes are behind you. And what is in front of you is the rest of it. All of it. Every morning, yours. That is the whole story. All of it is true. Here is the only question that ever mattered to me throughout all of it. What are you going to do when someone tries to define you without your permission? I knew the answer on the Tuesday I sat in Diane's office. I hope you know yours.